Hey everybody, welcome to the third video going through Bill's Fish Market. So if you recall from the first two videos, we've got our assumptions page. We formatted it nicely, added some comments. We've got the kind of layout of our accrual budget here. And to really understand why we set all these things up the way we did, we should go ahead and start using some formulas. So the first thing we want to calculate is our projected sales for each month. So let's just consider January. How much money in sales are we going to generate in January? Well, if we go back to our assumptions page, you can see that we're going to we plan on selling 100 fish per day, and we're going to charge $2 per fish, so that's $200 per day. And then we need to know how many days per week in the month. And you can see we don't have an assumption for that. Some people would create an assumption for the days per month. We might have one assumption for each month. Another way that people might do it is they might create an assumption that would have like an average number of days per month, and not be, you know, exact per month, but just work on that average. So one way to do it is we could create an assumption that you know, took the average number of weeks per month, which is 4 1/3, multiplied by the days per week that Bill's Fish Market is open. That's 7 days per week, and we could calculate the average number of days in a month. Instead of doing that, and that would be a perfectly fine way of doing it, I wouldn't have any problem with doing that. But instead, what I'd like to do is since, you know, we know for the year that we're looking at, in this case 2016, we know how many days are in each month. So why don't we go ahead and use the actual number of days per month. So what I'm going to do is insert a row here, and underneath each month, I'm going to enter in the number of business days that Bill's Fish Market is open each month. If you recall, they're open 7 days a week, so all I need is really the number of calendar days in each month. January's got 31. February, because 2016 is a leap year, got 29. Again, if you're doing this for a different year, you'll want to plan, you know, enter data accordingly. Let me go ahead and just finish this. Now, I don't like, in this case, I don't like the fact that these numbers are oriented the way they are, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. Whoops. There we go, finally. Okay, so now I've got the number of days that Bill's going to be open every month, and I've got how many fish they plan to sell, and I've got the price they're going to charge per fish. So the formula here to calculate the sales for January is going to be equals. I'm going to click on the cell that's got the number of business days per month. And then I'm going to hit the asterisk for times, go click on the assumptions page, the fish per day times the price per fish. So this is what my formula looks like. If I hit enter, then it takes me back to that accrual budget page, and you can see that Excel is calculating $6,200 in sales for January. And if I do a little sanity check, do the math myself, turns out Excel's math is perfect. So that looks very good. Now, can I just take this formula and drag it over for the rest of the months? Well, let me just drag it over to February, see if it works. No, it doesn't work. Comes up with 0. Why? Because if you look at the formula here, I've got all relative addressing here. So I refer to cell B6, and when I copy the formula over, it changes the B6 to B7, which is exactly what I want it to do, right? When I calculate February sales, I want it to use February's number of business days. So that is great. But when I refer to the assumptions page here for the, B6 is the number of fish per day. If I copy that over, Excel is going to change that B6 to C6. And if you look on my assumptions page, C6 is 0. So we're going to multiply by 0, and that's not good. So what I want to do is I want to add the dollar signs to the references to the assumptions page. So I can do that if I turn on that. I can hit, if I have my cursor in the cell reference and I hit the F4 key, it changes B5 to $B, $5, changes B6 to $B, $6. You can either type the dollar signs yourself or use the F4 key, whatever. But so I've now forced absolute addressing to the references to the assumptions page. If I hit enter, now I should be able to drag this formula over, and oh no, big mistake, big problem. What went wrong here? Nothing went wrong. These numbers, the formulas are absolutely correct. It's just my columns are not wide enough here. When you get these hash tags, all that means is your columns are not wide enough. So if you're smart enough, if you know something about Excel, you could turn on auto width. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go through and manually adjust each cell, double click in between the columns here to get it to adjust. So we've got sales for January through December. Now, you might, again, want to do a little sanity check here and say, all right, in January, I'm predicting 6,200 in sales. February, I'm only predicting 5,800 in sales. Why would that be? Well, in this case, I've got 2 fewer business days. So, yeah, if we're open 2 fewer days, you would expect that we're going to generate less in sales. So that's not bad at all. Now, one thing we're going to do here is later when we get done with all the formulas, we'll adjust the formatting a little bit here. So don't worry about adjusting number of decimal places and formatting and stuff. Let's get through the formulas first. All right, so we have calculated sales for each of the months. Again, that sanity check thing, you might want to, if something was dramatically different, if January sales was 6,200 and February sales was 1,000,000 or 200,000 or something, you probably got a problem with your formula. But this looks pretty good. So next line is we want to identify our cost of goods sold. Again, what is our cost of goods sold for the month? Well, we're gonna our cost of goods sold per fish is going to be $1.20, and if we're going to sell 100 of them per day for 31 days, what we want to do is take the number of days, 31 for January, times the number of fish we're going to sell per day, times the cost of goods sold per fish. So what would that look like? Well, we would say equals the number of days in January times, go on the assumptions page, click the number of fish we're going to sell per day times our cost of goods sold per fish. And it looks like it's going to, in order to generate $6,200 in sales, we are projecting that we're going to have direct cost, direct material and labor of $3,720. Again, before we can drag this formula over, we need to add the dollar signs when we reference the assumptions page. But once we do that, we can drag it over and voila. Again, you might want to do a sanity check. Gee, why is February lower? Fewer days. None of these numbers looks dramatically different than the other numbers. So we're probably accurate there. Again, we'll worry about the formatting later. The gross profit for January is going to be January sales minus January's cost of goods sold. So what we'll do here is we'll create a very simple formula that says equals January sales minus January's cost of goods sold, and we predict we're going to have a gross profit of $2,480. Awesome. So far, that's not our net profit, net income, because we haven't subtracted the other expenses here, but our gross profit looks pretty healthy. That's great. Now, can we drag this formula over? Well, yeah, we can. We don't have to worry about dollar signs here, because when we want to leave these as relative addressing with no dollar signs, because February's gross profit, we want to have be February sales minus February's cost of goods sold, and so on. So we can just drag that over, and voila, we've got a gross profit line for each month. Awesome. Now the rest of the formulas are generally pretty simple. Our fixed expenses for advertising, depreciation, and utilities are very simple. The advertising expense for each month, as you will recall, is $500, depreciation $100, and utilities $150. So what I can do for January is I can just say January advertising is going to be equal to whatever assumption I've got for the advertising. And you can see just a very simple formula. If you're doing this yourself, your row here might be different than mine. That's no problem at all. Whatever assumption you have for the advertising, just make sure you use that one. Then I'm going to add the dollar signs to the cell. Instead of B14, make it $B $14. So that way I can just drag it over. And then my depreciation, very similar, just equal. Click on whatever assumption I have for depreciation. Add my dollar signs. Zip it over. Utilities, same thing. $150 a month. Add my dollar sign so when I drag it over, it doesn't change the column. Great. So now I've got 3 out of my 4 fixed expenses done. Again, these are expenses that do not vary depending on sales or production or anything. Now the insurance, I should say, the insurance expense is a little different. As you recall, we're going to pay for a policy, prepay a policy in January for $1,200 that lasts the entire year. Now, when we do the cash budget, that means we're going to want to record $1,200 in January and 0 in all the others. But on the accrual budget, we want to record how much expenses it incurred, not necessarily when the cash is spent. So with a prepaid expense like that, we're going to spread it over the entire year. So that $1,200, instead of being $1,200 in January, we're going to every month take that total about $1,200 and divide over all 12 months. So what would that look like? Well, for January, we would say equals, click on the $1,200 expense, and then divide by 12. So you can see I've got my /12 here. Again, do not click over on the accrual budget. Just hit the Enter key, and it'll automatically take you back to the accrual budget. And you can see we've got $100 in January, which is January's share of that $1,200 expense. Again, since we're referring to the assumptions page, we want to add our dollar signs to it. Change B17 to $B $17, and then we can drag that over. And on the accrual budget, unlike the cash budget, the accrual budget, we have split that $1,200 evenly amongst all 12 months. Not too bad. All right. Just a few more formulas. The next section that we're working on here is the variable expense section. The first one is commissions. Commissions, as you recall from our assumption, are 5% of sales. they're paid 1 month in arrears, but we don't care about that. We're not looking on the accrual budget to worry about when we actually pay the money. We're looking when do we incur the expense. And we incur the January sales commission expense in January based on January sales. So what we're going to want to do is multiply January sales, the 6,200, times the 5%. So what would that look like? Well, we would say equals January sales, the 6,200, times, go click on the 5% assumption and hit enter. So we've got in January, we're going to incur a sales commission expense of $310 based on our January sales. To drag this forward, copy this formula across the rest of the year, we're going to want to add dollar signs to our assumptions. Again, we do not want dollar signs on the reference to January sales because we want that as we copy this formula to February, March, and so on. We want it to update to February and March sales. So we've got 310 for January. Drag it over, do a sanity check. Are these numbers all look like they're right? Yeah. Again, February is a little low, but that's because February sales are a little low, so not bad at all. All right. The last variable expense is the supplies. If you recall, supplies was actually a semi-variable expense. We're lumping it in with the other variable expense just for simplicity. But as you recall, to calculate our supplies semi-variable expense, we take 1% of that month's sales and then add the fixed component, the $200. So in January, we're going to have 1% of the 6,200 plus a flat fixed rate of $200. So what would that formula look like? Well, we would say equals January sales times, then go click on that assumptions page, the 1%. We're almost done, but not quite. And then plus the fixed amount, the $200. So as you see here, we're taking January sales times the 1%, but then we're adding the fixed percent. And then, again, don't click back on the budget sheet, but just hit enter, and boom, we calculated that we're going to have supplies expense of $262 in January. We can go ahead and add our dollar signs just to where we refer to the assumptions page. Click on that formula, drag it over, and do a little sanity check. Yep, those numbers look pretty good. Oh, I just noticed something. Hopefully you guys noticed before me. We forgot something up here. I forgot the row with total fixed expenses. So let's go back and do that real quick. What I want to do for my total fixed expenses is I want to add up these four numbers. So for January, I want to add up January's fixed expenses. Now, there's several ways we could do that in Excel. You know, we could do it a very slow way. We could say this plus this plus this plus this. That would work, but life's too short for that. We want to do it a better way. We could also use the sum function. But Excel has an even easier way. If you look here in the upper right of Excel, there's an auto sum function. If we click on that, Excel will guess at what numbers you want to add up. And here it's guessing that you want to add, in my case, B13 through B16. Turns out that guess is absolutely correct. So I'm just going to hit enter. So all I did again was hit the auto sum key and enter. Now when you use the auto sum key or any of these auto functions up here, if you know those, again, Excel's going to guess, so don't just blindly hit enter. Make sure that it's guessing correctly. But in this case, it's fine. So we dragged that formula over, left everything relative addressing. That's great. Might want to do a sanity check here and say, gee, wait a minute, this looks suspicious. I think there might be an error here because every month is exactly the same. They don't vary at all. Well, there's nothing wrong. What we're adding up here is our total fixed expenses. Fixed expenses do not vary depending on production, so it's going to be the same every month. And in fact, on the accrual budget, even prepaid expenses like the insurance, we're evenly splitting over every month. So no, the fact that every month the total fixed expense is exactly the same is awesome. All right. So now that we did the auto sum for the total fixed, let's also do auto sum for the total variable. Because what we want to do here is we want to add these two. And again, we could manually add those two, or we'll save ourselves some time by hitting the auto sum button, verify it's adding just what we want it to add, and sure enough, it's adding sales commissions plus supplies, so great. And we can drag that over. We're going to leave it relative addressing because we want February's to update and take February's commissions plus supplies. So it's looking good, looking good. Now, how about total expenses? You might be tempted to use the auto sum function here for total expenses, but that would not work so well. What we want to do, since we've already got a subtotal for fixed and a subtotal for variable, we want to add just these two numbers. So the auto sum is not, unfortunately, going to save us time here. So what we're going to do is create a little formula that says equals, click on whatever cell has got your total fixed, plus the cell that's got your total variable expenses, and hit enter. And I'm seeing that for January, we've got total expenses or total overhead, total administrative and selling expenses of $1,422. Can we take this and just drag it over? Sure, because when we drag it over, we want every month's total expenses to be that month. So if we drag it over, February's total expenses is going to be February's fixed plus February's variable. So we're doing great. Just a few more. Hang in there. All right, our net income before tax. What is that? Well, net income before tax is going to be our gross profit minus our total expenses. So the formula for that is going to be equal whatever cell has got your gross profit minus whatever cell has got your total expenses for that month. And again, we don't have to worry about dollar signs. We could leave everything relative addressing, and boom. So we're looking at a projected net income before tax of $1,058 in January, lowers to $922 in February. All the numbers look pretty decent. Looks good. Then we want to subtract off the income tax. And if you recall from our assumption, we've got an assumption that says that this company is in a 28% tax bracket. So they pay 28% income tax. But the question is, 28% of what? Well, you might think, oh, maybe they pay 28% of sales. That would be wrong. You might think they pay 28% of gross profit. That would be wrong. Companies, including if you own your own company or are self-employed, you pay income tax based not on your revenue or your sales, but on your net income. So you pay income tax on your revenue minus all of your expenses, your cost of goods sold, plus your administrative selling overhead expenses. So that's why companies keep very close track of all their expenses. If you're self-employed, I recommend you keep track of every single job expense you have, because every dollar that you can subtract from your income as an expense is a dollar that you don't have to pay income tax on. So it's a very smart idea. So what we want to do here is we want to take the row above it, the net income before tax, and multiply that by the 28%. That will calculate our income tax for January. So how would we do that? We'd say equals January's net income before tax times, go on the assumptions page, click that 28%, hit enter. I'm seeing a projected income tax expense incurred of $296.24 for January. Again, I want to add my dollar signs, to the reference to the assumptions page, and then I should be able to drag that over, and looks good. So then our net income after tax is just going to be our net income before tax minus our minus our income tax. So we can say net income before tax minus our income tax expense, and I've got a net income after tax or profit of $761.76 for January. Can I leave this alone, or do I need dollar signs? Just leave it alone. Relative addressing, drag it over, and great. So now you can see my projected profit for every month of the year 2016. Great. All we've got left is one more formula. So just want to make sure everybody's here. As you recall in the instructions, it says it's great to calculate our profit for every month, but I also want one cell that adds up all the monthly profit. So I want to add the profit from January through December and have one number here showing the total profit. So how would we do that? Well, again, there's many ways to do it. A very slow way to do it, we could say equals January plus February plus March and so on. You would fall asleep before I get to that. So it would be a little tricky to use the auto sum function. So let's manually type in the sum function. We say equals SUM, and then we type our left parentheses. And then we click on January's net income after tax and hold down the left mouse button and drag over until December. And then we can let it up and hit enter. And let me look at this formula here. What this is saying is equals SUM, and then in parentheses, B25 colon M25. You read that as cell B25 through M25. So this is telling Excel, add up all the cells between B25 and M25 inclusively, and come up with a total of $8,847.36. How does that look? Well, looks pretty good to me. The only thing that we have to do now is fix our formatting here. We did a great job with formatting, like, using some indenting and using the underlying and double bottom border here. But this looks very, very hard to read because, number one, we've got way too many dollar signs. You do not need a dollar sign in every single number. That just makes it tough to read, doesn't add any value. We only want dollar signs in the first row and the last row. And I would use it in this total here too. Otherwise, in between, I do not want any dollar signs. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and put all the cells between the first and the last line in comma style. And so I've gotten rid of all the dollar signs in between, our sales and our net income after tax. The other thing, though, is a lot of these cells here, most of them end in 0.00. In this case, doesn't really add any value to have the numbers ending in 0.00. So what I want to do is get rid of those decimal places, and I can use the decrease decimal button here to get rid of them. And now, to me, that looks a lot easier to read. We've got some more white space. We're not clogging it up with things that add no value, like a million dollar signs and 0.00. Now, you notice I did leave the two decimal places here for the income tax and for the net income after tax. Here, we're when we calculate the income tax, we do have some pennies. So I'm going to leave this in. Although, you know what? If you decided you don't like the way that looks, you want to be consistent, you could lower these to 0 decimal places here, and Excel will automatically round to the nearest dollar, and that would be perfectly fine in this case. I'm going to leave it just to show But if you thought for readability that it made more sense to round to the nearest dollar, I would certainly be fine with that. The last thing I'm going to change here is in our sales line, we've got some decimal places. I'm just going to go ahead and decrease decimal to hide those. So now we've got our sales line has got decimal with 0 decimal places, our net income after tax, and our total has got a $sign and 2 decimal places, but everywhere else looks just great. So that is the video that explains how to do the formulas for the accrual budget. If you have any questions on this, be sure and let me know. Otherwise, the next video or videos will go into the cash budget, which is coming up next.